the quiet architect of a new world, the life of Hyo Won-yu. In the tumultuous crucible of post-war Korea, amidst the ashes of conflict and the fervent search for meaning, a new spiritual movement began to coalesce around the figure of Reverend Sun Myung-moon. Among the nascent church's earliest and most pivotal adherents was a man whose quiet intellect, unwavering dedication, and profound spiritual insight would prove indispensable. Hyo Won-yu, often referred to with reverence as Elder Yu or Father Yu, he was not a charismatic orator or a bold evangelist in the conventional sense, but rather the meticulous, scholarly architect who helped translate a tempestuous spiritual revelation into a coherent written doctrine. His life was a testament to the power of quiet faith, intellectual rigor, and steadfast loyalty, charting a course from a traditional Korean upbringing to the very heart of a global spiritual revolution. This is the story of Hyo Won-yu, the man who helped give voice and structure to an emerging faith, laying the theological bedrock for what would become the Unification Church. 1. The seedbed of intellect, early life, and a nation in flux. Hyo Won-yu was born in 1913, deep within the rapidly changing landscape of Korea, a nation then still under Japanese colonial rule. His early life was shaped by an era of profound upheaval, where ancient traditions clashed with imposed modernity, and the seeds of national identity were sown amidst hardship and resistance. Details of his early childhood are not widely known, but it is understood that he hailed from a family that valued education, a common aspiration among Koreans seeking to preserve their cultural heritage and advance under a foreign yoke. He grew up in an environment where the pursuit of knowledge was seen not just as a personal endeavor, but as a means of national upliftment, a path towards independence and self-determination. From a young age, Yu displayed an exceptional academic prowess and a deeply contemplative nature. Unlike many of his peers who might have been drawn to the more extroverted fields of politics or activism, Yu gravitated towards intellectual pursuits, demonstrating an innate curiosity about the fundamental questions of existence, morality, and the human condition. His studies led him through the rigorous educational system of the time, where he distinguished himself as a diligent and thoughtful student. He pursued higher education, specializing in fields that engaged his analytical mind, possibly in law, philosophy, or economics, equipping him with a robust intellectual framework that would later serve him profoundly. The liberation of Korea from Japanese rule in 1945, followed almost immediately by the devastating Korean War, 1950 to 1953, plunged the nation into chaos and spiritual despair. Cities lay in ruins, families were torn apart, and the very fabric of society seemed to unravel. In this vacuum, traditional belief systems struggled to provide adequate answers, and people yearned for a new understanding, a fresh spiritual impetus that could heal wounds and offer a clear path forward. It was a time ripe for new religious movements, for figures who could articulate a comprehensive worldview capable of addressing the deep-seated suffering and existential questions of a generation. During these formative years, Yu Hyo-won, like many educated Koreans, sought purpose and meaning beyond the mundane. He was a man of his time, deeply aware of the moral and spiritual crises facing his country and humanity at large. His intellectual journey had prepared him to critically examine the world around him, but it also left him with an unquenched spiritual thirst. He had likely explored various philosophical and religious traditions, dissecting their tenets with his characteristic rigor, yet none had fully satisfied his soul's yearning for absolute truth and a clear blueprint for peace. He was, in essence, a seeker, a man poised at the threshold of a profound encounter that would reshape not only his own destiny but also the course of a global spiritual movement. His keen mind and deeply ethical sensibility were not merely academic tools. They were the very instruments through which he would eventually recognize and articulate a truth he believed was divinely revealed. 2. The inevitable meeting drawn to the source. The mid-1950s in Seoul were a period of intense spiritual ferment. Amidst the rubble and reconstruction, Reverend Sun Myung Moon began to gather his first disciples. Moon, having endured imprisonment for his faith by both communist and democratic regimes, was an enigmatic figure, speaking of a profound new understanding of God's providence and humanity's purpose. His teachings, delivered with an intense spiritual authority and deeply personal experience, were revolutionary, challenging conventional interpretations of Christianity and proposing a comprehensive worldview that aimed to resolve the fundamental problems of human history. It was into this nascent spiritual crucible that Hyo Won-yu was drawn. The exact circumstances of their first meeting are illustrative of the profound impact Moon had on those who encountered him. Yu, by this point, was a mature intellectual, likely in his early 40s, with a reputation for sharp discernment and a meticulous nature. He was not one to be easily swayed by emotional appeals or superficial charisma. Instead, he would have approached Moon's teachings with a healthy skepticism, demanding intellectual coherence and spiritual depth. The initial encounter, perhaps through mutual acquaintances or by simply hearing Moon speak, must have been a revelation. Yu, with his structured and analytical mind, found in Moon's words not just abstract theology but a living, breathing truth that resonated with his deepest spiritual longings. Moon spoke of God's original ideal for creation, the tragedy of the human fall, and the long, arduous path of restoration, a path that Moon believed was culminating in their very generation. He presented a vision of salvation not merely for the individual soul, but for families, nations, and ultimately, the entire cosmos, culminating in a world of peace and harmony centered on God's love. What distinguished Moon's message for Yu was its comprehensive nature. It provided answers to philosophical questions that had eluded him, a logical framework that interconnected seemingly disparate aspects of existence, from the nature of God to the purpose of science, from personal ethics to global governance. Yu, the intellectual, found his intellect not dismissed but challenged and engaged, seeing how Moon's spiritual insights offered a unified theory of reality that embraced both the spiritual and the physical, the historical and the prophetic. Crucially, it wasn't just the intellectual appeal. You experienced a profound spiritual awakening. Moon's teachings were not merely theoretical. They were imbued with a powerful spiritual energy that touched the very core of his being. He witnessed Moon's absolute conviction, his willingness to suffer for his beliefs, and the genuine love he extended to all who sought truth. This spiritual authenticity, combined with the intellectual rigor of the teachings, proved irresistible to Yu. He realized that he had not merely found a new philosophy or religion, but a living truth, a profound encounter with the divine purpose for humanity. His decision to follow Reverend Moon was not a light one. It meant abandoning the conventional path of a respected intellectual, facing societal scorn, and embracing a life of hardship and persecution alongside a figure who was already controversial. But for Yu, the truth he had discovered was too profound, too encompassing to ignore. He committed himself entirely, becoming one of Moon's earliest and most steadfast disciples, embarking on a journey that would forever redefine his life and, through his efforts, significantly shape the foundation of the Unification Church. He understood instinctively that his particular gifts, his intellect, his diligence, his capacity for systematic thought, would be crucial in articulating this new spiritual vision to a world desperately in need of it. 3. The architecture of revelation. Hyo Won-yu's most enduring and significant contribution to the Unification Church was his pivotal role in systematizing and articulating the divine principle, Wuli Kongron in Korean, the foundational theological text of the movement. Reverend Moon had received his revelations over many years, often through intense spiritual experiences, visions, and direct communication with God. These revelations were initially shared in sermons, lectures, and personal conversations, a wealth of profound insights, but not yet codified into a comprehensive, written doctrine accessible to a wider audience. It was Yu Hyo-won who possessed the unique blend of spiritual sensitivity and intellectual discipline to translate these divine insights into a structured, logical, and coherent theological system. The task was monumental. Imagine a torrent of spiritual truth, powerful and expansive, flowing from the mind and heart of Reverend Moon. Yu's role was akin to an architect receiving vivid, intuitive blueprints from a visionary, and then meticulously rendering them into detailed plans, ensuring structural integrity, logical flow, and accessibility without diminishing the grandeur of the original vision. He spent countless hours in deep communion with Reverend Moon, listening, questioning, debating, and internalizing the complex concepts of creation, the fall, restoration, and the purpose of history. This process was not merely an academic exercise. It was a collaborative spiritual undertaking. You often spent nights meticulously transcribing Moon's lectures, then painstakingly organizing and refining the material, striving for utmost clarity and precision. He would grapple with difficult theological concepts, seeking to express them in language that was both profound and comprehensible. He brought to this endeavor his deep knowledge of philosophy, theology, and the human condition, helping to bridge the gap between Moon's revelatory experience and the intellectual understanding required by spiritual seekers. The early formulation of the divine principle involved a painstaking iterative process. You would draft sections, present them to Reverend Moon for review and correction, and then revise them repeatedly until the text accurately reflected the core truths and nuances of Moon's original revelations. He was not just a scribe. He was a co-creator in the sense of giving form and structure to a divine message. His logical mind helped to identify potential inconsistencies, clarify ambiguities, and ensure that the various parts of the doctrine formed a unified and harmonious whole. He sought to make the divine principle a comprehensive worldview, capable of explaining not only theological questions but also historical events, social phenomena, and the deepest mysteries of human existence. The resulting text, Divine Principle, became the foundational scripture of the Unification Church. It introduced a unique understanding of God as a dual characteristic being of heart, intelligence, and purpose, the origin of all existence. It expounded upon the purpose of creation, the nature of the human fall as a consequence of misdirected love, and the intricate, providential history of God's efforts to restore humanity and establish His kingdom on earth. It offered a renewed interpretation of the Bible, integrating traditional Christian concepts with new revelations, and provided a framework for understanding world religions, philosophy, and science under a unified paradigm. His dedication to this task was absolute. He worked tirelessly, often under extremely difficult conditions, in poverty, facing persecution, and with limited resources. His spiritual discipline and intellectual rigor were exemplary. The divine principle stands as a testament to his profound understanding of Reverend Moon's message and his singular ability to articulate it with clarity, depth, and logical coherence. Without Yu Hyo-won's meticulous and dedicated work, the profound and complex revelations of Reverend Moon might have remained largely uncodified, disseminated primarily through oral tradition, and their global impact potentially diminished. He was the quiet architect who built the intellectual framework that would support a spiritual movement destined to span continents and cultures. For forging a movement, early church building and the fires of persecution. The early years of the Unification Church in post-war Korea were marked by extreme hardship, intense persecution, and the immense labor of building a movement from scratch. Hyo-won-yu, having committed himself fully to Reverend Moon's vision, was not only involved in the intellectual articulation of the divine principle but also deeply immersed in the practical day-to-day challenges of establishing the church. His unwavering loyalty and steadfast character proved invaluable during these trying times. Life for the early followers was austere. They lived in poverty, often sharing meager meals and sleeping in cramped, makeshift quarters. The nascent church was viewed with suspicion by established religious institutions and often with hostility by a society grappling with its own recovery. Reverend Moon and his followers were frequently slandered, accused of cultish practices, and ostracized. This environment tested the faith and resolve of every member, and many fell away. But Hyo-won-yu remained. He shared in the persecution that Reverend Moon and the early community endured. Moon himself faced multiple imprisonments, and his disciples were frequently subjected to social scorn, threats, and physical assaults. As a prominent early follower and the main articulator of the doctrine, you would have been a significant target for critics and antagonists. Yet he never wavered. His conviction in the truth of the divine principle and his profound respect for Reverend Moon provided an inner fortitude that transcended external pressures. Beyond his scholarly pursuits, Yu took on numerous administrative and leadership roles within the burgeoning church. He was instrumental in organizing study sessions, teaching new members, and translating the complex theological concepts into practical guidance for daily life. His calm demeanor and intellectual clarity made him an effective teacher, capable of patiently explaining profound truths to seekers from diverse backgrounds. He helped to train the first generation of leaders and missionaries, instilling in them not only the theological understanding but also the spirit of sacrifice and absolute dedication that characterized the movement. He played a critical role in establishing the church's first institutions, from small study houses to the initial administrative structures needed to manage a growing community. His background in organization and his meticulous attention to detail were crucial in these early stages. He helped to create order amidst the enthusiastic but often chaotic energy of a new spiritual movement, ensuring that the foundations were strong and sustainable. His presence was a calming and steadying force. While Reverend Moon often pushed boundaries and challenged conventional norms with his prophetic pronouncements and tireless energy, Hyo-won-yu provided a counterbalancing presence of intellectual rigor and quiet stability. He was the anchor who ensured that the revolutionary spiritual insights were firmly grounded in a comprehensible intellectual framework, making them accessible and defensible. Through it all, Yu Hyo-won remained humble and self-effacing. He never sought personal glory or recognition, always directing attention back to Reverend Moon as the source of the revelations. His focus was singular: to serve God's providence through Reverend Moon, to articulate the divine principle as purely and accurately as possible, and to help build the foundation for a new world centered on God's love. The fires of persecution only seemed to temper his resolve, hardening his commitment and deepening his faith. His life during this period was a living testament to the unification principle of enduring suffering for a greater cause, reflecting the very path of restoration he spent years articulating in written form. 5. Expanded horizons, leadership, teaching, and global footprints. As the Unification Church grew beyond its humble beginnings in South Korea and began to establish a presence internationally, Hyo-won-yu's role evolved and expanded. He transitioned from being primarily the architect of doctrine to becoming a revered teacher, a wise counselor, and a critical elder statesman within the burgeoning global movement. His influence during this period ensured that the core theological principles remained consistent and deeply understood as the Church spread across continents. With the divine principle now systematized, Yu's primary focus shifted to teaching and training. He undertook extensive lecture tours, both within Korea and, eventually, internationally, to explain the intricacies of the unification theology to new generations of followers and curious outsiders. His lectures were characterized by their clarity, logical progression, and deep spiritual insight. He could articulate complex ideas in an understandable manner, making the profound truths of the divine principle accessible to people from diverse cultural and educational backgrounds. Many early leaders and missionaries of the Unification Church credit Hyo Won-yu with providing them with their foundational understanding of the faith, equipping them to teach others. His teaching style was not merely academic. It was imbued with the same spiritual conviction and earnestness that had characterized his initial encounter with Reverend Moon. He conveyed not just information, but also the spirit of the truth, encouraging his students to deeply internalize the principles and apply them to their lives. He was known for his patience, his gentle demeanor, and his unwavering commitment to truth. As the Unification Church established centers in Japan, the United States, Europe, and other parts of the world, Yu Hyo-won played a crucial role in ensuring doctrinal fidelity. He worked to oversee the translation of the divine principle into multiple languages, a complex task that required not only linguistic precision but also a deep understanding of the theological nuances to ensure that the core message remained intact across cultural divides. He collaborated closely with translators, providing guidance and clarification, always striving for accuracy and spiritual resonance. Internally, he served as a trusted advisor to Reverend Moon, often providing a quiet, insightful perspective that balanced Moon's expansive vision with practical considerations. His wisdom was sought on matters of doctrine, church administration, and the spiritual development of members. He helped to foster an environment of intellectual depth and rigorous study within the church, ensuring that the movement's spiritual growth was always accompanied by a clear understanding of its theological foundations. His leadership went beyond formal titles. He became a living embodiment of the divine principles teachings, a man of profound integrity, humility, and unwavering faith. He was a model for other leaders, demonstrating what it meant to live a life totally dedicated to God and humanity's salvation. He emphasized the importance of individual character development, stressing that the true transformation of the world begins with the transformation of the individual heart. Even as the Unification Church faced continued skepticism and opposition in various forms around the world, Yu Hyo-won remained a pillar of strength. He stood firm in his convictions, offering intellectual defense of the faith against criticisms and patiently seeking to clarify misunderstandings. He represented the intellectual and theological backbone of the movement, lending it credibility and depth in the face of widespread misrepresentation. His contributions during this period were critical in solidifying the Church's global presence and in ensuring that its rapid expansion was built upon a strong, clear, and consistent theological foundation. He truly helped to expand the horizons of the movement, not just geographically, but also in the depth of its intellectual and spiritual understanding. 6. The enduring legacy, a life of unwavering service. Hyo-won-yu lived a life defined by unwavering service to God, Reverend Sun Myung-moon, and the unfolding providence of the Unification Church. He passed away in 1970 at the relatively young age of 57, a profound loss for the movement he had helped to build and intellectually define. Yet his legacy continued to resonate, shaping the Unification Church for decades to come and influencing countless individuals. His passing marked the end of an era for the early pioneers, but the fruits of his labor were ripe for harvesting. The divine principle, meticulously crafted under his guidance, became the indispensable textbook for every new follower. It was translated into dozens of languages as well as studied in countless workshops, and served as the intellectual blueprint for the Church's global missionary efforts. Through this foundational text, Hyo-won-yu continued to teach, guide, and inspire generations of unificationists long after his physical departure. Yu's legacy is multifaceted. Foremost is his role as the primary articulator of the divine principle. Without his singular capacity to translate profound spiritual revelation into a logically coherent and systematic theology, the Unification Church might have struggled to establish its intellectual credibility and doctrinal consistency. He provided the framework that allowed the teachings of Reverend Moon to be understood, studied, and disseminated effectively across diverse cultures and academic landscapes. He essentially gave the spiritual vision a concrete, intellectual form, making it accessible to the inquiring mind. Beyond the written word, Hyo-won-yu left an indelible mark through his personal example. He embodied the ideals of the divine principle: absolute faith, unwavering loyalty, intellectual humility, and tireless dedication to God's providence. He was a model of quiet strength and profound integrity, demonstrating that true leadership can be exercised through scholarly rigor and steadfast service rather than through outward charisma alone. His life was a testament to the power of intellectual pursuit when combined with deep spiritual conviction. His contributions also instilled an enduring culture of study and intellectual engagement within the Unification Church. He ensured that the movement was not merely based on emotion or blind faith, but on a deep understanding of its theological foundations. This intellectual tradition, rooted in Yu's work, encouraged followers to grapple with complex ideas, to seek truth through reason as well as revelation, and to articulate their faith with clarity and conviction. Even today, Hyo-won-yu remains a revered figure within the Unification Church, often evoked as the standard-bearer for theological accuracy and dedicated service. His name is synonymous with the divine principle itself, and his life story serves as an inspiration for those who seek to bridge the gap between spiritual truth and intellectual understanding. He was the introspective, scholarly foil to Reverend Moon's more public, charismatic leadership, two complementary figures whose combined strengths enabled the unification movement to take root, grow, and spread its message across the globe. Conclusion: the quiet architect's unending echo. Hyo-won-yu's life was not one of dramatic public pronouncements or grandstanding. Instead, it was a life characterized by profound intellectual discipline, unwavering spiritual conviction, and selfless service. He was the quiet architect, the meticulous scholar, the steadfast follower who understood the immense historical significance of the spiritual truths revealed through Reverend Sun Myung Moon. In a world yearning for meaning and purpose after devastating conflict, he helped to lay the intellectual and theological cornerstone for a spiritual movement that promised a new heaven and a new earth centered on God's love. His journey, from a contemplative student in colonial Korea to the co-creator of a foundational spiritual text, mirrors the arduous path of spiritual restoration itself, requiring patience, perseverance, and an absolute commitment to truth. He faced skepticism, poverty, and persecution, yet his faith never faltered. He chose a path of service and sacrifice, dedicating his every faculty to articulating a vision of peace and unity for humanity. The divine principle, his greatest tangible legacy, continues to invite millions to explore a comprehensive understanding of God, humanity, and the universe. Through its pages, Hyo-won-yu's voice, imbued with the clarity and depth of his intellect and spirit, continues to resonate. He demonstrated that true faith is not afraid of intellectual inquiry, and that profound spiritual truth can indeed be distilled into comprehensible, systematic form. Hyo-won-yu's story is a powerful reminder that history is not only shaped by those who stand in the spotlight but also, crucially, by those who labor diligently and faithfully behind the scenes. He was the quiet strength, the intellectual anchor, and the unwavering heart at the very core of the early unification movement. His life was a profound testament to the power of a single individual's dedication to a cause greater than himself, leaving an enduring echo of truth and service that continues to inspire seekers of peace and spiritual understanding worldwide. He truly was one of the foundational figures, whose unwavering commitment to articulating and propagating the divine principle ensured that Reverend Moon's vision would not just be heard, but deeply understood and profoundly transformative.